What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. Pokémon evolution can be a temperamental thing, resulting in wondrous surprise or profound disappointment. However, as consistent as evolution might be throughout the series, it is not always set in stone. Sometimes Pokémon can pick up a new evolution along the way, but perhaps even more interesting is the fact that some Pokémon can evolve into the exact same outcome through multiple methods. This is quite rare in the franchise, so we do have a narrowed pool from which to draw, but a thankful shout out to Turtle Bro for reminding me of my own discussions of Pokémon evolution in the past, and let's see which changes in Pokémon evolution methods are the best. Number 6. Rockruff. So to be clear, a change in general evolution in a Pokémon is not enough. Maybe if the traditional Voltorb could use the Leaf Stone to evolve into the Hisuian version, it would count, but as of now, only the regional version can do that, and likewise the other is incapable of becoming the regular Electrode. That's why Rockruff is so intriguing, because it obviously has its evolutions intrinsically tied to the times of day. But in its debut generation, it also depended on which version of the game you were in. Even if you leveled up Rockruff at night in Pokemon Sun, nothing would happen and vice versa, only allowing the forms of Lycanroc to align with the box art mascots, even though it is true that the Dusk form could be in either of the Ultra versions. That's not great if you're trying to complete your collection, but luckily in later generations they removed that restriction so that you're free to attempt whichever Lycanroc you want in all versions. Except the Dusk one still requires that unique ability that the others don't. Although it is a bit strange that apparently Dusk changed from the 5 PM hour to 7 o'clock instead, but it can only be a benefit to players to give them even more options for evolution. And instead of choosing which version to buy because of the form of wolf that you prefer, you can simply decide what time of day to level up your little stone pup to initiate its next form, getting either midday, midnight, or both of them, even if the time scaling is really fast in Gen 9, only leaving you 3 minutes of dusk time. Number 5. Leafeon and Glaceon. Ever since Eevee got new branches in Johto, we've all speculated when more might show up. It's been a little while now since the last one, but I would never count the evolution Pokemon out entirely. But Gen 4 gave us Leafeon and Glaceon, two very basic types that are frankly surprising to come out so long after Dark and Psychic. But in an effort to explain why we had never seen them before in any previous games, they concocted a brand new kind of evolution, requiring you to level up Eevee in specific locations at the Mossy Rock or Icy Rock respectively. While this made sense, simply put, it was kind of stupid. First of all, they were hardly equal since the Mossy Rock is pretty much always found a lot earlier in the region, once again locking away ice until the end of the game, so good luck trying a Glaceon at any time before the 6th gym. Furthermore, these were the only Pokemon to use these rocks to evolve at all, meaning that they had to perpetually program in these dedicated locations for no other reason than you might want to try a weird cat thing once in a while. This is why it was so refreshing to finally have it changed so that Leafeon and Glaceon could evolve using standard evolution stones. You know, the same kind that the original evolutions also used. This isn't as big of a deal for Glaceon since the Ice Stone was only introduced one generation before the change took place, but at the same time, how did nobody think to alter it when they were drawing up the Ice Stone in the first place? Although that's not nearly as egregious as Crabominable, who was brought in at the exact same time as said new evolution item, but decided to use a different ice-based location separate from Glaceon's. That whole thing was a mess. But I can guarantee you that the gratitude for the ease of access of being able to use a Leaf Stone on Eevee far outweighs any complaints of people that might say, it doesn't make sense because it didn't react in Fire Red version or whatever. Nobody cares, and I only hear positive reception for evolving these Pokemon outside of a microscopically specific spot out of the whole game. Number 4. Gimmick Evolutions. Eevee was not done, however, because then we got Sylveon, who was also under the mindset of trying to explain why you could never get one before, so to solve that, they tied the new fairy type to the Pokemon Ami mechanic. This is actually kind of smart, because getting to personally interact with your Pokemon by playing with it, and feeding it to create a bond of evolution works on a thematic level. They just never thought about what might happen when they made a game without Ami-like functionality. They've tried with the Galar camping and other methods, but trying trying to pet your Pokemon without a bottom screen stylus just isn't the same. So with the only way to get a Sylveon gone, it didn't matter how many hearts you could get. That's why changing the evolution method was necessary and respected. Knowing a Fairy-type move was already a requirement, but now you simply needed a high friendship while knowing said Fairy attack. This makes Sylveon obtainable in any game since you can build friendship outside of the 3DS era, but the only downside is that it does sort of conflict with Espeon and Umbreon, since they do use friendship as well. But if you don't want Sylveon, just make sure that you don't learn that Fairy-type move. However, that's not all, because other Pokemon have used gimmicks to evolve, like say Qwilfish needing to use an attack repeatedly in a strong style to become Overqwil. Well, I think you can see that most Pokemon games don't have a strong or agile style to trigger such a change. So luckily, it's now good enough for Hisui and Qwilfish to simply know the move Barb Barrage instead, and then you will be granted its wonderful next stage. This may lose a bit of the theming that I like of battling with your Pokemon to make it grow, but Qwilfish still needs all the help that it can get. Number 3. Magnets. We mentioned Sinnoh introducing location-based evolutions, and they added in a big one with Mount Coronet being the only way to get a Magnezone and a Probopass, two cross-generational evolutions to past Pokemon that are honestly pretty good. Luckily, you can't really avoid Mount Coronet and Sinnoh, so you'll get there eventually. However, Heart Gold and Soul Silver had no way of evolving a Nosepass or a Magneton. This was later changed to any area with sufficiently high magnetism, which allowed for several iterations of random spots over the generations, which was honestly pretty fun because you never know what you would get. But it can lead to trouble, like when they picked up Charjabug, who evolves in the same way. The only problem was they decided to make the magnetic pole of the Alola region the Vast Pony Canyon on the final island, meaning that you can't even get a Vikavolt and you're stuck with a Cocoon Pokemon for the whole game. They did eventually upgrade the power plant in the Ultra games to get it a little bit earlier, but the damage was already done. And I'm convinced that this is finally what made them look elsewhere for that magnetic power. And they didn't have to look far because the Thunderstone was available. And it did still fit the theme of magnetic properties changing these Pokemon, even though it works on Pokemon that aren't even electric types. So now instead of waiting for a magnetic area to pop up somewhere, you could evolve these Pokemon as soon as a Thunderstone becomes available. And this is great because it effectively doubled the number of Pokemon that could even use this item to evolve, because for some reason it was shockingly limited. So this is much better than the previous evolutions because it was able to fix multiple Pokemon while still keeping them together as a cohesive unit. It's a win-win. Number 2. Feebas. The dirty, tattered Magikarp of Gen 3 tried really hard to outdo the original by not only being incredibly difficult to find in the first place, but once you do grab hold of one, it's much harder to evolve than it ever was to get a Gyarados. There you could just switch train it enough to eventually pay off, but with Feebas you had to max out its beauty stat before it would become a Milotic. A unique choice for sure to effectively highlight contests, but that also meant that you had to churn through way too much Pokéblock to make it worth it. So that's already tedious on top of the tedium of catching the Pokemon in the first place. But what even happens when they don't have contests in the game anymore? Well, luckily, instead of making Milotic impossible to get, Generation 5 introduced a new item, the Prism Scale. This gift from the Rainbow Fish allowed Feebas to evolve into the beautiful Sea Serpent without feeding it a thing. Although it does require a trade like a Metal Coat or some of the other items, but as annoying as that is, a trade is still easier to pull off than raising its beauty stat to the highest it could be. And the best part is you can still do it both ways. I mean, they did bring back contests a bit in Oros, but if you give your Feebas enough Pokéblock and then transfer it up to, say, the Alola region, it will still evolve because the beauty stat is still there, even if it's hidden. So the fact that they gave the same Pokemon two unique ways of evolving only goes to show how special it is to warrant that kind of attention, even if you've never taken the effort to do one or either of them. Number 1. The Linking Cord. As we just said, trade evolutions can be a bit of a hassle to secure in order to not only find someone else who owns another version of the game, but one who will willingly trust you to give back their precious Pokemon. Or you could just always go for the even trades to both get something of equal value, say by offering up a Graveler or a Pumpkaboo, when it's actually kind of beneficial to keep the traded version to make it grow faster. And it is true that online trading has stemmed the hardship a bit, however, it's still inconvenient to even use some of the best Pokemon in the franchise because you have to grind everything to a halt just to evolve your Boldore before it gets outclassed by everything in the mid to late game. At least that's how it used to work until now. See, Pokemon Legends Arceus was crafted as a single-player experience, which meant no online battles, but also no trading, which could work just fine, except they included several Pokemon that require trades to evolve. And I don't even mean like the Porygon line, because they just got to have their hold items switched to emulate evolution stones. But what about all the Haunters or the Kadabras? Well, somebody over there needs to be getting a raise, because the solution of the linking cord item was brilliant. Simply creating one item to apply to any generic trade is a great way to get around that wrinkle if you don't know anybody else with the games, since you don't always want to have to do online trading, like if you have a shiny version for instance. And of course they picked the perfect item to use. It's not just some random crystal or whatever. The link cable has thematic significance as the only way for the Game Boy consoles to communicate back in the day. Essentially the thing that gave these Pokemon the power to evolve in the first place, if you will. Now, maybe it's a meta point, with the space-time distortions in the Hisui region that even allowed these items to show up in the game in the first place. And maybe ordinarily they couldn't even exist in this world. But the ease of accessibility to these final stages needs to be carried on into the future. Even though the link cable sat out of Scarlet and Violet, we do have another Legends game on the horizon, so hopefully we can see it in a more permanent station. The least they could do is let us have one linking cord per game so that we can choose which of the trading Pokemon we would like to get on our own for a change, allowing the linking cord to remind everyone that it's never too late to shake up how you can get a Pokemon. Which changes in Pokemon evolution methods do you think are the best? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.